50 miles east of here lies the coast of Europe, an entity that's been generating rules and regulations for decades. Laws that, in the view of its critics, has been stripping away British sovereignty. Back in 1974, the great British jurist Lord Denning said that it was a rising tide that flowed into our estuaries and up our rivers and couldn't be held back, getting us mired in a quagmire of legislation over which we have no control. But does this loss of sovereignty matter? And is it even really happening? A street party in the East End of London to celebrate the Queen's 90th birthday.
Come on! Let me see your people out here, come on!
Perhaps no better place to explore the nature of British sovereignty.
The Queen and the ruling of the Queen, that's always been the way of the Englishman, isn't it, So,
do you think that we have lost sovereignty to Brussels?
no, not sovereignty. She never really did the rules, did she? She just faces the rules, or is the headpiece, the government.
I would really like, personally, to leave Europe so that we can at least try to get some of our English/Britishness back.
But she did confess to having recently bought a flat in Barcelona. It seems the people were confusing sovereignty with patriotism. It's complicated. The whole idea of sovereignty has taken centuries to evolve. Many would argue ultimately that sovereignty rests with Parliament, but it wasn't always that way. Back in 2015, King John was forced to meet his barons here at Runnymede. They'd beaten him out of his capital in London and they made him sign the Magna Carta. Now that established the freedom of the individual under the law. In a sense, it was writing the DNA code for democracy, and that ultimately has led to this idea of parliamentary sovereignty. As the wheels of history turned, this power meandered erratically, but always towards Parliament. It was then entrenched with violence, with Oliver Cromwell's victory in the English Civil War and the regicide of King Charles I in the 17th century. Parliament's power, and therefore its sovereignty, grew further with the acts that joined Scotland to England. And with the 1707 Union of Parliaments, a new nation was born: Great Britain. Now, arguably, it wasn't until the 19th century, with the advent of universal male suffrage, and then in the early 20th century, when the Brits came up with the then amazing idea that women should have the vote, that real legitimate sovereignty was concentrated in these buildings behind me. After World War II, the British Empire went into terminal decline, and the tapestry of imperial commerce and defence was replaced with a network of new multilateral relationships that pin together a patchwork quilt of international law. All of it technically erodes national sovereignty. Robin Niblett is an expert in international relations, and he explained that sovereignty is, and always has been, a flexible thing.
The United Kingdom at the moment has the advantage that it's decided that it's well served by being in loads of organisations. We are the most networked organisation of all. We're in the G20, the G7, permanent member of the UN Security Council and the EU. And the question is the UK getting things out of its EU membership that it cannot get through the others? The main economic organisation in which we're in, where we have some influence, one of the biggest of 28 member states, is the EU. You're not going to get that clout economically in the global economic system in the G20, where we're a relatively small player next to China and the United States. You're not going to get it in the UN, where, okay, we might be a permanent member of the UN Security Council, but again, we're overshadowed really by the big boys.
World attention centers on Washington, as in the State Auditorium, representatives of 12 nations of Western Europe and North America assemble for the signing of the North Atlantic Treaty.
Perhaps the greatest loss of sovereignty for the British Parliament is the right to declare war. Britain joined NATO in 1949. Since then, the country has had to make war on the Three Musketeers principle, all for one and one for all. Already Russia has invaded Ukraine. If it went on to attack a NATO member like Latvia, in or out of the European Union, we would have to go to war.
If Britain leaves the EU, it will be detrimental to European security. I think there's no way of sugarcoating that particular pill. The EU is already vulnerable because of the difficulties of the Eurozone crisis, because Russia sees the EU, as much as NATO, maybe more than NATO, as a threat to its sovereignty and its control, because it's about rule of law, it's about democracy, and these are things that can be threatening to Vladimir Putin's system of government. So for the United Kingdom to pull out is to weaken the EU as its bargaining power, as its political credibility. Very importantly, of course, it also weakens UK sovereignty, because its ability to negotiate with Vladimir Putin on sanctions or whatever, which is the main tool we're using with Vladimir Putin now, is economic sanctions. Your negotiating power is that much weaker. And this is at the heart of sovereignty. Sovereignty is about outcomes. Sovereignty isn't something you hoard or you possess. It's up to governments to decide how much do I keep to myself and how much do I deploy with others to be able to achieve my objectives.
Of course, everyone knows, or should know, that citizens of the European Union member states do have democratic representation to Brussels through the Council of Ministers and through the directly elected European Parliament in Strasbourg. But perhaps the one area least understood is the European Court of Justice.
There's one place that really winds up those who believe that sovereignty in the United Kingdom has been eroded by the faceless bureaucrats of the European Union. It's this place, the European Court of Justice. And by coincidence today, the European Commission is bringing a case against the British government to try to block them from preventing immigrants from claiming benefit for their children and other welfare payments. And there's no escaping the fact that if you've got 28 different nations and 28 legal systems, loads of lawyers all squabbling about what different bits of legislation means, you're going to need a referee, and that is what this place is.
To many, the ECJ has become a law factory, just as Lord Denning warned. It generates 1.1 million pages of legal documents in 24 languages every year. It employs 625 lawyer linguists, 75 full-time and 200 freelance interpreters.
In case C-308-14, European Commission, against the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the Court First Chamber hereby 1. Dismisses the action, 2. Orders the European Commission to pay the costs.
So there we've had the European Court of Justice actually strike a blow for British sovereignty against the European Commission. Not only that, but costs were awarded to the British and against the Commission.
Eleanor Sharpson's got a black belt in karate, useful perhaps for smashing her way through the EU's legal system.
It's wrong to think of it as a single snapshot in time. It isn't. It's an evolving pattern. You have legislation. You have a ruling by this court on the meaning of a particular piece of legislation. That will be against the background of discussions that are ongoing in Brussels, and this is not the Brussels bureaucracy reaching out. It will be a committee in which representatives of all the member states are sitting. Then the court makes a decision. Now, if the member states are content with that decision, that's fine, that stands. If they feel that the law, the legislative text, needs adjusting, they have the power to do it. You don't have to leave the EU to adjust the text.
Many here now argue that the sovereignty of Parliament has been eroded too far.
Well, sovereignty should lie in this country with Parliament. That is where it has lain in the past. The problem is that we're now in a muddle, and people talk about pooling sovereignty. So they talk about Europe somehow, the top table at Europe, being a place where we share sovereignty. The question is whether sovereignty can really be shared, and particularly the sovereignty of Parliament, which, after all, is a democratic institution in a way that the European Union perhaps is not.
But one could argue that parliamentarians themselves have been giving away sovereignty to Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales as part of devolution. So what is the problem? Are MPs just after more power? Sovereignty of them over us? I asked an old friend, a former legal advisor in Whitehall, Martin Thomas.
It is the case that when we joined the EU, we were giving up our sovereignty, that is to say, our ability to act alone on all of the issues that were laid down in the then EU treaty. What we decided is that those things would be dealt with, that means legislated, that means a law would be made about them, at the EU level and not at the British level. It seems to be the case that the most prominent voices arguing that we should leave so that we should take back control are voices belonging to parliamentarians who would like to have that level of control.
It now seems that the very idea of sovereignty is slippery. It's a contract between us, our government, and through it to the rest of the world.
So we're pretty much up to our necks in agreements with international organisations that have taken away our sovereignty. The United Nations, the World Bank, the IMF, NATO. But we still got our pints, and there'll always be an England. Cheers.